My name is Emmanuelle Labo. I'm the director of the Aston Centre for Applied Linguistics at Aston University, and I'm coordinating this initiative. But the big boss for this series is actually my colleague Reka Narula, who is very well known to many of you. So I will just hand over to Reka, and I will focus on letting people in. So over to you, Reka.
Thank you, Emmanuelle. Thank you, everybody who's joining us this evening, and a big thank you to Mike Olaf, the executive director, of the NRPSI, which is the National Register of Public Service Interpreters. He's also the registrar of the NRPSI. So before Mike gives his presentation, I just want to give you a little introduction to who Mike is. So he joined the NRPSI in May 2019. And before that, he was a partner in a consulting firm, which was based in Bahrain and worked across all the Gulf states. And before that, he spent a fair number of years, I'm not going to say how many, publishing magazines with various companies, working in newspapers and digital channels, both in the UK and across the Gulf countries. He has also been a senior manager at a national newspaper, the Mail on Sunday. He was the director of Northern and Shell, and he was on the board of the London Evening Standard. He's also launched media brands in Dubai. He also has been a chief executive for Prime Media International, again, based in the Gulf, specifically in Bahrain. And he has an MBA, gaining a distinction. He's also a fellow of the Institute of Leadership and Management. He's a consultant, a facilitator, a mentor, a business coach, a trainer, a public speaker, and a published business writer. And in terms of our work as interpreters, he is very passionate about the role of professional public service interpreting and translating. And he is committed to lobbying and advocating for protection of the public, for upholding standards, as well as greater recognition, awareness, and appreciation of language service professionals who serve the public and the public sector in the UK. And that's a little bit about Mike. Over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that introduction. And hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Apologies if my voice is a little raspy, but I've had a bit of a cold and it's just affected the voice. But I hope you'll all be able to hear me clearly as we run through a gallop of some PowerPoint slides to help guide us to understand the National Register, or NRPSI, as many call it, or NRPSI for an even shorter mnemonic. So NRPSI, what is it? Well, I'm sure that there are many of you here today who are either NRPSI registrants or have been along to a NRPSI presentation somewhere in the last couple of years. And for those of you who are NRPSI registrants, I'm sure you've seen the proud to be a NRPSI registered and regulated interpreter lozenge and logo that many people are beginning to use. So why are we proud to be a NRPSI registered and regulated interpreter if we are? And what exactly does NRPSI do? Just as importantly, what does NRPSI not do? Well, firstly and foremostly, we're not an agency. The role of NRPSI is not to go out and to win business. Clearly, there is an open source national register for everybody who becomes a registrant, so that's very easy to access. Clearly, each registrant has their own card, and on the back of the card, there's a QR code, which you can scan, and people can come straight to your site on the National Register. And of course, you can add comments about yourself, help sell yourself. In fact, many registrants actually use their site as their website. But the National Register's role is not that of an agency to go and gain business. And we're certainly not a union. There is a union within our ecosystem, NUPIT, the National Union of Professional Interpreters and Translators. And in fact, only last week, an outgoing director of NRPSI, Lalia, became the chair of NUPIT. So we're hoping to work really closely with NUPIT in the future. The National Register is not an examining body. We're not an academic body. We rely on other organisations that are academic bodies to have their qualifications approved by Ofqual, and then our role as NRPSI is to validate those examination certificates. So the National Register is not an examining body, and nor are we a regulator of examinations. That's not our role. That's Ofqual. Now, according to the Professional Associations Research Network, they believe there's approximately something like 400 professional bodies in the UK looking after many different professions. And these professions represent just about every professional in the United Kingdom. And we'll come around to a definition of what is a professional, what is somebody just doing a job, an occupation, and what is a profession. But in terms of professions, professional associations and societies acting for their members, that's first and foremost. There are many associations and societies that act on behalf of their members. You have to be qualified to be a member, then that association's role is to work on your behalf. The National Register is not one of those. Learned institutes, which again act on behalf of their members, but also stretch the boundaries of the profession in terms of research, in terms of knowledge. The National Register is not one of those. The other definition from PALM about these organisations that represent professions, there are regulatory bodies with qualifying registrants, not members, qualifying registrants. And the role of the regulator is to protect the public and to oversee agreed professional standards. And that is what the National Register is. It is a regulatory body. It is the only regulatory body for public service interpreters in the United Kingdom. Its standards are set and have been set now for very many years. And the role of the National Register is to protect the public, to oversee professional standards, and to ensure that those people who do qualify to be registrants are proud to be NRPSI registered and regulated interpreters. The associations that we've mentioned, there's the Association of Police and Court Interpreters. Actually, the longest association within our community is actually older than the National Register itself. There's a Society of Operational Metropolitan Interpreters. Work purely and simply with the London Met Police, but again, an association, a society working on behalf of its members. Then there's the youngster in the pack, the Association of Interpreters and Translators. Again, an association. Role it is to work on behalf of the members, given they qualify. What's interesting about each one of those associations is that unless you are a registrant on the National Register, you cannot be a full member. It's a recognition by the associations within our community that we do need to have a regulator. We do need to have standards upheld. We do need to have a code of professional conduct to which people adhere. In terms of institutes, there's the Chartered Institute of Linguists. CIOL actually is the organisation where the National Register was originally born, and we'll touch on that a little bit more a little bit later. Chartered Institute of Linguists, of course, is a broad church, the very use of the term linguist. Every professional interpreter is indeed a linguist, but not every linguist is a professional interpreter. And there are a lot of commercial translators, conference interpreters, as well as academics who are part of the CIOL, who are not public service interpreters. And then, of course, we have another institute, the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, which is much more geared towards the commercial side of translation and interpreting. But there are some members of the ITI who are also registrants of the National Register. Just to put some numbers on that, the Chartered Institute of Linguists, from its membership base of something like 6,000, there's 500 of them who are registrants on the National Register. With the ITI, with its membership base of something like 3,000, there's 100 of them who are registered public service interpreters on the National Register. The APCI has around 130 members who are all registrants. SOMI has about 70 members, of whom all are registrants. And the ATI, very young organisation, started only a couple of years ago, already with 40 full members who are all registrants on the National Register. And of course, there's a union, NUPIT, and the union's job is to act in a very robust manner on behalf of its members. Then there are the agencies like the big word, DA Languages, Sintra, Language Line, the list goes on. Each have got different roles within the ecosystem. The National Register's role is different to all of those roles. And of course, it is based around interpreting standards. And we have been sitting on a changing landscape, which has been shifting over the last 30 years. Standards, why should we bother with them? Ethics, why should we bother with the Code of Professional Conduct? Regulation, why should we have any form of regulation? Why should there be protection of standards? Should we have a voluntary or indeed a statutory regulatory body overseeing our profession? And what's the vision for 2030? What might public service interpreting look like? Well, let's just focus a little bit on the difference between an occupation and a profession. The definition of an occupation basically focuses on regular activity performed to earn daily bread. Here's a job, I can do it, I've earned something, thank you very much. That's not the definition of a professional. Professionals clearly have to do, yes, we have to earn our daily bread, you have to have a roof over your head, you have to put food on the table, but there's much more to being a professional than earning money in a specific field of activity. Serious professionals need standards, and the standards need to be agreed. And there must be some form of regulation to ensure that people are matching and meeting those standards. And there are three essential pillars in an effective regulatory structure. Profession needs a high degree of knowledge and expertise in a specific field. So you as an individual, if you're a professional, you need to have a high degree of knowledge. How do we test that? Through examinations. High degree of expertise. How do we test that? Basically through experience, evidenced experience. Continuously expanding knowledge and expertise. Well, the National Register does not mandate continuous professional development, but it certainly encourages it. Were you to turn to the news pages of the National Register's website, you would see probably 1 in every 5 news story is a CPD story. It's about something that's coming up, a particular continuous professional development event, which you can sign on to and join. So we act as a clearinghouse for CPD to ensure that people are developing their knowledge and developing their expertise. And of course, then there's a recognition of the accreditation of professional practitioners' competencies. If you are an NRPSI registered public service interpreter, then whoever meets you will know that you have had an independent verification of your qualifications, independent verification of your evidenced experience, independent verification of your ID, no false ID, an independent verification of your right to work in the United Kingdom, plus access immediately to your page on the National Register, as well as carrying the Code of Professional Conduct, which is there not just to police you as a registrant, but to help protect you, to make sure that if people are asking you to do something which is not in your best interest, you can show them the code show that you adhere to this code, and therefore you're not going to carry out that work. Now, there are many, many different professions within the United Kingdom. Did you know that landscape gardening in 1929 became a profession with a regulated a group of landscape gardeners who prove their experience and prove their qualifications, and they can join a voluntary national register? My wife and I made a mistake a few years ago. We brought in a gardener. We didn't check whether they were regulated and registered. The gardener did a terrible job for us, and we had nowhere to go. Had we picked somebody who was regulated and registered, then we could have raised a complaint with that regulator. Our next gardener came along who was regulated, and actually we had no problem. Doctors only became registered and regulated in the United Kingdom in 1858. Prior to that, anybody could call themselves a doctor, whether you had any qualifications or not. Bit like today, where somebody who's got bilingual expertise, interprets within their family and for their friends, will sometimes be asked to be an interpreter in a doctor's consulting room. Will sometimes, as long as they've enrolled on a level 1 course, which is basically a GCSE course, you don't even have to get it. But if you've enrolled on it, the courts today, the Ministry of Justice, will allow you to operate as an interpreter in a bail hearing, in a first hearing. So doctoring was not dissimilar to that before 1858. In 1858, doctoring became a statutory profession, recognition of title. Nursing's interesting. When asked when was the first ever professional nurse, the majority of people will say Florence Nightingale, 1850s, Crimean War. And that's absolutely right. Florence Nightingale wrote the first ever code of professional conduct for nurses during her time in Scutari in Bulgaria during the Crimean War. It took 70 years after the First World War before nursing became a regulated profession with state recognition. Teaching today, yes, there's a regulator. Actually, the most recent regulator in teaching was only set up in 1998. Would you believe that actually you don't have to be a registered regulated teacher to teach in the UK? I was asked only quite recently whether I would like to do some teaching in a private school. And I made the point that I had no teaching qualifications. I had no teaching experience, or training experience, but no teaching experience. And they said, oh, it doesn't matter. You can come along and teach. I said, I don't think I can, because I'm not a regulated or registered teacher. The oldest profession which is regulated in the United Kingdom is actually a London taxi driver, the black cabs. They can stretch their history back to 1662, when London taxi drivers, if they they weren't taxi drivers then, they were horse and cart. If they wanted to earn money to carry people around in London, they had to be registered and regulated. And there's a direct line from the black cabs of today all the way back to that period. Now, of course, minicabs have since been registered and regulated as well. But Uber drivers haven't. Now, if you've a 19-year-old or 21-year-old daughter who's coming home from a party at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you're in London, would you prefer them to be in a regulated and registered vehicle with a regulated and registered driver, or with an Uber driver who's not registered and not regulated? I'll leave that for yourselves. Personal trainers. It goes back as far back as 1921. It's still only a voluntary regulator. This was very important for me, actually, in this last year. I have had cardiac issues. I've had some cardiac procedures. I have to go to the gym on a regular basis as part of my recovery. The local gym I go to, that is closest, does not have trainers who are regulated and registered. The next gym, a little bit further away, every single one of their trainers are regulated and registered and part of the register of personal trainers. This register that was set up in 1921. This is a life-threatening issue. It's high level of risk. You're absolutely right if you're thinking that Mike will have gone with a regulated and registered trainer. That's absolutely. Directors of listed companies, they do not have to be regulated or registered. They have a fiduciary duty to return profits from which dividends go to shareholders and they build stakeholder value. All of the agencies, which are private companies, which are profit-driven, their prime motivation is actually to create profits, to pay dividends to the owner, and to then also build shareholder value. Their main priority is not protection of the public. It's not even protection of the public purse. It's not even protection of the public sector organisation that engages with them. And it's certainly not the protection of those individuals that they send out for interpreting engagement. It's very important to remember that. If it's a private company, if it's delivering profits, it's delivering dividends to shareholders, and it's delivering shareholder value, the directors of the company have got a fiduciary duty to do that, not to protect the public. And I suppose this drawing of a horse kind of really sums it up. And I might put it another way. A mother will quite rightly nurse their child when the child is ill, and will deploy every instinct that the mother has to look after that child. That does not make them a state-registered nurse that can operate effectively when dealing with the public. And it's the same with interpreting. Just because you kind of can, if you haven't been trained, if you haven't got the qualifications, if you are not gaining experience, you're not adhering to a code of conduct, then actually you won't be doing the job to the best of your ability. And indeed, there's only recently been a case where it's been found through the National Health Service, a patient died due to poor interpreting. There was also a case not that long ago in the courts where there was an individual who had been on the National Register, came off the National Register, continued to work with agencies, working in the court, and actually was falsifying birth certificates, making 14-year-old girls seem to be 21, and falsifying certificates for 22-year-old men, making them out to be 15. That particular individual is now serving a sentence in prison. What we know is this, that there is, within the United Kingdom, according to law, the absolute need that if there is somebody who does not speak English, that is seen to be a hindrance when it comes to the courts, and therefore there has to be an interpreter. What isn't within this stipulation in law is that the interpreter should be regulated, registered, have qualifications, and have experience, and that's the big issue. Within the NHS, there is guidance, and you can find this guidance in the notes from September 2018, that actually the NHS trusts should only be looking to source their interpreters from either the National Register of Public Service Interpreters Level 6 with a DPSI ELF, or at least a Level 3 Community Interpreting qualification, as long as there's also proof of vocabulary in terms of taking qualifications to get the vocabulary to work within the NHS. Now, we all know that NHS trusts, very few of them actually follow those guidelines. The key word there is should. When it comes to sign language for the deaf, it's a must. The NHS says that an interpreter must be regulated by the NRCPD. And why is there such a difference? Why is there such a difference? Well, the difference is there because clearly deafness is seen to be a disability, whereas not speaking English isn't. But it's the same ultimate end. The ultimate end is you actually desperately are keen to have the right person carrying out the interpreting job to ensure that the voice is heard. We want to give voice to the voiceless. So there is an arc which moves from no regulation, it's an occupation. Limited regulation, it's a nascent, it's a budding profession. And this is where we were as a profession back in 1994 when the National Register was brought into being. Public interest merits greater regulation. This began to gain pace. And indeed, there's one particular exemplar public sector organisation in the UK right now, that's the London Met Police. Their interpreters can only be drawn from the National Register. The rest of the police are beginning to change. The PATE scheme is moving in the right direction. There's still a lot to be done. There's a heck of a lot to be done with the Ministry of Justice. I'm sure many of you got lots of questions. And there's a huge job to be done with the NHS and the Home Office. But we get to a stage where the ecosystem accepts self-regulation by the profession. And we are most definitely in this arena where the Chartered Institute of Linguists, the ITI, the associations and the societies all recognise the value of and the importance of NRPSI as the voluntary national not-for-profit regulator and register for public service interpreters. Next step is mandatory engagement. As we've said, it's absolutely the case with the London Met. It is beginning to stretch through the PATE scheme into the rest of the police. The PATE scheme is not that far away from seeing mandatory engagement. There's still some hurdles to overcome. And we have yet to see what the Ministry of Justice are going to bring up with their new framework. But we've been lobbying exceptionally hard. For any of you who've been watching what they're lobbying in the last few years, you'll know just how hard we've been lobbying there. And indeed, with the NHS, particularly this last year. And then we'll gain statutory recognition. There is an inevitable inexorability to this happening, particularly when you look at the way in which different organisations have changed, have gained their regulation in their own professions, how it took 70 years in nursing. The National Register was launched in 1994, so we're about 35 years coming up now with the National Register. Is it going to be another 35 years? Oh, we certainly don't think so. We think it's going to be a lot earlier than that before we actually achieve a regulatory framework where we gain protection of title. A profession has a need to minimise, diminish and alleviate the risk. First and foremost, we have to protect the public. Secondly, we have to set, maintain, develop and promote standards. We have to confirm relevant vocational qualifications. We have to accredit competencies gained through experience. And remember, these accreditations have to be done by an independent body, not by a commercial body. We have to measure degrees of competence through proportionate, accountable, consistent, transparent, and targeted approach. And that the Code of Professional Conduct, the Disciplinary Committee, the Professional Conduct Committee act in brilliantly on behalf of NRPSI, with, again, professionals running those parts of the organisation. We have a judge who is chair of the Disciplinary Committee. We have magistrates. We have barristers who sit on the panels when those committees are called. We have to protect the qualifying professional practitioner. Your best protection is being a registrant with NRPSI. You have the Code of Professional Conduct to guide you, and you also have the amplification of your voice. I'll give you an example. There was one particular interpreter who was told that their vetting for police didn't count in other parts of the UK because it'd been issued by the Met. And they complained to the agencies. The agency said, no, you're going to have to pay for a new vetting through Warwickshire. This particular interpreter brought that problem to us. We spoke to the police, National Police Management for Language Services in Leicestershire. The agencies were told that they were wrong. And then this practitioner did not then need to get another NPPV3. There's this amplification of the voice to ensure that standards are protected. And of course, we have to promote the Code of Professional Conduct, focusing on integrity and impartiality. We manage the Professional Conduct Committee, the Disciplinary Committee, the appeals processes, and we actively lobby for protection of title, for professional practitioners. Supporting the regulator and the registered professionals, be it voluntary or statutory, absolutely vital. Now, we've got to around 6:05. I know we've got 25 minutes or so to go. I could go on for hours, as I mentioned earlier, but I think it's not a bad time to halt here. There are many, many more slides in this presentation, but what I'll do is we'll put it into a PDF format. I'll send it through for Emmanuel and for Rekha, and they can actually pass it on to everybody who's in the Aston Interpreters network. I think we'll call it a halt here for the formal presentation, and perhaps we'll move to questions.
So how is the profession regulated in the UK compared to the rest of the world, really?
Right. Well, it's quite interesting. Many other parts of the world look to the UK for guidance. Only last year, the chief prosecutor from Japan came to talk to us at the National Register because they'd sent out through their network of embassies and said, look, could you please have a look and see how public service interpreting is organised within your country? And we spent a lot of time with the commercial attaché in the Japanese embassy. The information went back, and the chief prosecutor decided to come to the UK to look at how NRPSI works, and has taken much of what we've done and is beginning to set that up actually in Japan. And there are, in the States, we had a joint presentation not too long ago at the Chartered Institute of Linguists, and the Americans were saying that the work that's done by NRPSI in the UK is far more developed than it is in the US. They called it the Wild West in the US when compared to our regulated and registered arena. Now, we all know that registration and regulation is limited to people with a DPSI or DPSI equivalent, level 6 or above. And you need 400 hours of evidenced experience to be a full status registrant. But at the same time, with the National Register, if somebody has got 2 of the modules out of the 5 for a DPSI, 1 translation, 1 interpreting, and has got evidenced hours, then they can join as an interim B. If somebody's just recently managed to achieve their DPSI or level 6 equivalent, but don't have the hours, then they can join the National Register as an interim A. So the regulation is very much about why does it exist, called into being in 1993 by a Royal Commission, supported by the Nuffield Trust. It was launched under the auspices of what was then the Institute of Linguists, was the CIOL. It became its own not-for-profit organisation only in 2011. So for many years, it was part of the Chartered Institute of Linguists. And the National Register's role is protect the public purse, maintain standards, ensure that there's a sense of professionalism around public service interpret, and to lobby for protection of time. We would love to see regulation and registration stretched to community interpreting level 3 and above. And that's very much part of our drive for the future, because we see that again as part and parcel of regulation and registration of professionals who are operating, to ensure then that there's less and less non-professionals within public service interpreting in the UK. We want, if you like, black cab drivers, mini cab drivers who are regulated, and what we don't want are people who are not regulated, like Uber cabs.
Somebody, unfortunately there is no name, there is just a number, asking if NRPSI has a mandate to oversee and regulate the pricing applied in telephone interpreting and VRI services.
Outstanding question regarding remuneration, but not just remuneration on face-to-face, but not just on remote, but also with telephone and indeed as things move forward with video. No, we don't have a mandate for controlling or setting pricing. The view's always been that the National Register's role is there for protection of the public. Yes, it is important then that we have professionals managing that. Yes, professionals need to be well treated by public sector organisations and well treated by the agencies that are doing a lot of the outsourcing. We know that they don't. We know that often that's not the case. And we know that there's been a race to the bottom when it comes to engagement fees. And that's very much evident across the whole of the public sector. Our junior doctors are on strike, our nurses are on strike, professionals are leaving teaching. So there's been this drive to drop how much people earn when they're professionals, and it truly affects public service interpreting as well. What we do have a mandate for, given that we are mandated to protect standards, we have a mandate to shout from the highest rooftops that remuneration should be commensurate with qualifications and with experience, and that terms and conditions should be fair. If you were to turn to the National Register's, NRPSI's strategy document, that is very loud in there. It's one of the key platforms that remuneration should be commensurate with experience and with qualifications, and terms and conditions should be fair. And if fees are getting flattened, so people are earning pennies for minutes, then we know something's gone desperately wrong. And we know that that's kind of where we are now, and we have to start to drag that back up. So, short answer, no, we don't have a mandate to control engagement fees. We do have a mandate to shout for standards, which means that engagement fees should be much fairer than they currently are.
And just a couple of things for Mike. First of all, Hiba has raised her hand to ask a question, I'm presuming. And after she's asked her questions, if you don't mind, I'll put Mesbah's comment, because I think it's very important. And
Right.
it's especially important for those who are not yet qualified or not yet on the National Register. So Hiba, I think it's Hiba via FNIAS. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Hiba.
Yes, it's Faisal. Yes.
Right.
Yes, I've been an interpreter, but I can only write English. I cannot write another language at all. So how will I do that in terms of NRPSI? I mean, I got
NRPSI.
ability.
Yeah, it is a big issue. It is a big issue, and there are some languages where it's absolutely vital. Where the written word is in a particular script. If you're working in the police and you've got to look at witness statements, and then you have to be able to read from the page, or you have to be able to help write the witness statement, and within a court environment. And sometimes even within the NHS, when it's a complex case and there's a lot of written documents, if you're not in a position to be able to actually read or to write, then there's going to be issues. And with the Code of Professional Conduct, if you're ever faced by something which you can't do, then you should step away from it immediately. The reason it states that is to protect you. Imagine if something goes horribly wrong on the back of your interpretation, which is indeed what's happened with a recent case where somebody died in the NHS, and that interpreter, the person acting as an interpreter, was not a registered or regulated interpreter, did not have qualifications. Imagine what a prosecution lawyer is going to do to that individual. You've got no protection at all. So from your own point of view, you need to think very carefully about when you put yourself into a position where you're going to be engaged and going to be a paid for, you're going to be earning money for interpreting. If you put the public at risk, if you put the public sector organisation at risk, you really do put yourself at risk, and you've got no cover and you've got no protection.
Thank you, Mike. So if I'm going to now read out what Mesbah said, as Emmanuel said, it is a bit lengthy. He says, I quote Mesbah, I am in full support of the NRPSI as a regulatory body and was probably one of the first 250 members. However, how much power does the NRPSI have and exercise in terms of verification of the quality of a registrant? Unfortunately, there is a very wide variation in terms of quality between DPSI qualified interpreters, unless they have attended an in-depth course as delivered by Dr. Yvonne Fowler, who is here present with us today. Mesbah, spoke with an NRPSI interpreter last week who has passed the DPSI in law as a private candidate, private in inverted commas, has apparently interpreted for various police forces, etc., for the last couple of years, but does not know what, I'm going to read it out, PAC interview /IUC means.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, really good point. It is a physical impossibility. It is a physical impossibility to police how every single registrant on the national, remember, they're not members of NRPSI or registrants. Associations, societies and institutes work on behalf of their members. Remember that the National Register is working on behalf of the public, and that those who are on the National Register are registrants. It is absolutely a physical impossibility to check every single registrant every single time they go on a engagement. What the National Register conducts is if you like, a GIGO approach. Garbage in, garbage out. Check the front, check the back. Input and output. By this we mean, at the time of input, have they achieved their level 6 qualification? Have they got the 400 hours of experience? There don't seem to be any complaints about those 400 hours of experience. Is their ID correct? Can they work in the UK? Do they adhere to the Code of Professional Conduct? At the back end, we have an incredibly effective Professional Conduct Committee, Disciplinary Committee and Appeals Committee. As I said earlier, staffed by professionals. The Disciplinary Committee is managed by a judge, his chair. We have barristers and we have solicitors and magistrates who sit on panels. We also have very experienced practitioners who sit on those panels as well. Every complaint we take very seriously. So, for instance, with the example that you're using, were you to raise a complaint, then I would take my hat off as the executive director, put my registrar hat on and say, here is a complaint. It is an evidence complaint. It is a registrant who knows that there is another registrant that hasn't actually got all the knowledge they should have. They should be encouraged to get that knowledge. That complaint would then get passed to the Professional Conduct Committee. The Professional Conduct Committee would review the information, would ask the person who's been complained against to put their case, and if they found that this individual did not know some of the very basics that were necessary to work effectively in the police, then they would encourage them to take a course to uncover that and to come back in a period of time to show, one, they've done it and show that they know how to do it. We cannot police every single individual on every single engagement. What we can do, check everything up front, ensure people are adhering to the Code of Professional Conduct. If they breach that code, which indeed it is a breach of the code to be working in the police and not know pace, and then somebody will complain. I promise you, we get a lot of complaints. Those complaints have to be sifted. If the complaint is evidenced, it then goes into this PCC, BC, Professional Conduct Committee, Disciplinary Committee, and Appeals Committee process. And in fact, we have had individuals who've worked with police where the police forces have raised complaint, saying this individual doesn't have everything that they should have. And we followed that complaint through, and those individuals who've been complained against have had to actually do something about it. Like you, I truly believe, Mesbah, that before achieving a DPSI, there should be some formal training. And it's not within our remit to do that. That belongs with the Chartered Institute of Linguists and also with the other examining body. It's called ICQ, also offered DPSIs. There are many superb training organisations. One you've mentioned, there's DPSI Online. There are many others. And we would encourage everybody to ensure that they are involved in continuous professional development, that they're widening their skills, they're looking for where their skills are low. And we'd also encourage anybody who's got a evidenced complaint to actually raise that complaint. The process is very simple. Well, just go to the website. It'll guide you as to how to do it. I hope that answers that question. It's a superb question. Thank you very much.
Mesbah has his hand up, so I'm going to let him come in.
Please, yes.
Thank you very much. I was unfortunately not able to voice my question previously because I had very ropey Wi-Fi connection, but it seems to be stable now. Now, Mike, forgive me, but I'll try to play the devil's advocate now here. Is
Please
it
do.
back to front if you're saying that other colleagues, etc., should raise a complaint against qualified, DPSI qualified colleagues who may not have the full possession of experience and skills, rather for you as a regulatory body actually to tighten up with these qualification providers in terms of how they deliver their courses and how they really improve on the delivery of the teaching methods, etc.
Mesbah, I would love to invite you in on some of our meetings with the Chartered Institute and with ICQ. I mean, I can qualify as only just taken over from an organisation called Training Qualifications UK, TQ UK, and I can ICQ have never run qualifications for languages, and yet there they are running DPSIs, and we've been lobbying them very hard to ensure that as part of the examination that they drill through deeper. So that's very much on our agenda, that given where we are, given what we've got, given the way the system's set up, right now it works. We would be so pleased to be able to mandate continuous professional development. We're not there yet. But we're a nascent, budding, young profession. As a profession, it only really started in 1994 when the National Register was launched. We're very young. But yes, in terms of where we're looking to get to, and I think I mentioned it in one of the slides earlier, this continuous development, this drive for greater professionalism. Where we are today now is that the DPSI or equivalent is checked. The 400 hours of experience is checked. And actually, we do often get in touch with the organisations who fed through the evidenced experience and ask, have you had any issues? Have you had any problems? And then we also check the identity and the right to work. Plus, then we demand that individuals adhere to the Code of Professional Conduct. If somebody's carrying out work for which they are not qualified or do not have the skills, the code is really clear. They shouldn't be doing it. If it's a breach of the code, we need to know. We cannot be everywhere at once, Mesbah. It's a physical and financial impossibility. We're a not-for-profit organisation. When complaints are raised, we have an extremely effective complaint handling process. And we rely on getting it right up front and getting it right at that end, and on people to feed complaints to us and through us. You'll also notice, if you look on the website, that the complaints, when they're upheld, are listed. Not the individuals concerned, but the nature of the advice that's been given, the nature of what's been expected, and indeed when there's been expulsion. So I hope that gives you some confidence, Mesbah. Clearly, we're not perfect. You're absolutely right. Show me an organisation that is. Do we have things we wish to achieve in the future? Yes, we do. Do we work closely with the other stakeholders? Absolutely. We're in and out of the CIOL's offices on a regular, well, more Zoom these days than offices. And we've been lobbying ICQ, this new Ofqual regulated examiner, to ensure that they raise their standards as well.
If I could maybe summarize a few questions that we have in the chat. So some people are inquiring about how they can validate some previous experience they have, either high-level degrees in languages from other countries, or lots of experience but no qualification, because for some people the price of taking the DPSI exam is very high indeed. So would you have some advice on that?
I do. Go to www.nrpsi.org.uk. You will have that email address on the PDF that I'll send through for Emmanuel and for Rekha. Go to that website, www.nrpsi.org.uk. Click on the tab that says Interpreters, and click on the tab that says How to Join. The other tab to click is the News tab, and on the left-hand side you find a drop-down menu, Qualifications, an explanation as to how you can work around the qualifications. Recall I've been saying a level 6, such as the DPSI or DPSI equivalent. Remember what the selection panel will be looking for are interpreting modules. There's translation modules as well for sight translation, which we've touched on already earlier, and then evidenced experience. You can join the National Register with your evidenced 400 plus hours of experience if you have then also the equivalent of a interpreting module and a translation module, perhaps from a master's course or perhaps from a couple of degree courses, and the selection panel will check them to make sure that they are the equivalent of, and you can join not just as full status, but as interim A and interim B. I would heartily recommend exploration. We haven't got time now. I can see that we're racing down to half past. We've got a minute to go. But I heartily recommend exploring the website. And if you've got questions, do not hesitate to email me. Again, my email address is on the information that will come through, and then I'll redirect your question to the right person within NRPSI as an organisation to help you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I've put in the chat. Yes, I know that there are still many questions, but I think our timer is up now. So you have the website in the chat. You can check. Mike will circulate his slides, so you will be able to contact him for a specific question. I've also put the link to the survey, your feedback on this session. Please spare a couple of minutes to do that. It's not a long survey, but it's important for us to have your feedback. If we have evidence of demand for more events, well, that gives me the power to ask for more money to organize events. So help us to help you. That's very important. Rekha, maybe you'd like to conclude?
Thank you, Emmanuel. Maiho has said that the link is not working to give feedback, by the way. I just thought I'd let you know that. Thank you very much, Mike, for this excellent presentation and for your insight. I've actually learned something today in terms of the joining criteria for the NRPSI. And also maybe another time you'll join us. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who's attended this evening. It was really fantastic. Thank you very much.
Can I ask one question regarding that, so I can know that I need to attend the next event or not? Because we are talking about the diploma, who have ever done the diploma or higher studies. I just did the level 3 for community interpreter, and I think I'm on the wrong place right now.
Well, can I just say, please no. I mean, community interpreting and community interpreter qualification is an exceptionally good qualification. but it doesn't prepare you for simultaneous. It doesn't prepare you for sight translation. However, it does prepare you for many different roles within the public sector. So let me encourage you to be certainly involved with your colleagues and to partake. And who knows, there may come a day where you turn around and say, actually, I do want a DPSI. But please recognise community interpreting, a level 3 qualification, it's a great qualification to have. But please never take on a job which you're not prepared for.
Yes, I am doing over the phone. I am right now for 2 years, I'm doing over the phone. And I took the calls mostly on demand, but there is very low ratio of on demand because you cannot earn that much. And you know how the DPSI is very expensive. So nowadays it's very hard to get into it.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, unfortunately, we have to conclude. Sorry, Mike, thank you for your question.
I have to say thank you very much for the invitation, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for hosting, and thank you all for your time. I've really appreciated being with you, and I've taken 3 minutes extra time to go over. That's dreadful, very naughty of me. Thank you all very much indeed.
You're forgiven, Mike. Bye, everybody. And next month, we will have an on-site and hybrid event, so you can choose to be with us at Aston University if you wish to. I will send information. Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.